Welcome to Fill the Void podcast, where we discuss unhealthy human habits caused by the society of consumption. Hi, Norma. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm good as well. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to be on this episode of Fill the Void podcast. Pleasure to talk to you. So, Norma is the director of client relations at a law firm called C8 Goldberg, and she's the creator and host of a podcast called Oral Arguments. So, first of all, Norma, I want you to tell us a little bit about your podcast, Oral Arguments, and how did you start with that project? How did
Yeah,
you come up with that idea?
thank you for having me on. I'm really excited and grateful to be here. So, I started my podcast, Oral Arguments, about a year ago, since 2022. And we talk about sex, tech, and victims' rights. So, I have guests who are experts like in the field of victims' rights, image-based sexual abuse. We have activists. I've sex workers and sex worker activists. We've had just people from like all different industries that have some kind of element of like sex, tech, or victims' rights in the work that they do or like the things that they talk about. And I started the podcast basically out of like conversations that I was having with coworkers and with like colleagues and friends in my personal life. As you said, I'm the director of client relations at C8 Goldberg, which is a victims' rights law firm in Brooklyn. And I started back in 2018 as the client relations coordinator. And now I'm the director of client relations. And I've spoken with thousands of people in my time at the firm. As a victims' rights law firm, we deal with like sexual abuse and a lot of tech facilitated abuse. So, whether it's like image based abuse or stalking, sextortion, all different kinds of crimes. So, I've been doing this work for years and also doing activism work outside of like my day to day. And I started meeting other activists from all around the world. And I was like, okay, the conversations that we're having, we need to bring it to the public and to talk about these things in a way that's not so heavy. Like it's not trauma porn, even if you listen and you might hear like a heavy story or something, like I never want people to walk away feeling drained.
Mhm, exactly. Yeah, I love that because even my concept here in Fill the Void, it's a little bit of like exposing symptoms that are heavy and people feel sometimes ashamed of even saying these things out loud, you know what I mean? All the issues that come out of the society and the system that we live in, which also relates to a lot of what you do. Do you sexual abuses that happens and these terrible situations? Why, like the cause of these things, it's because the system that we live in, how we are raised. What are the main causes?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that the main cause is people who violate consent. Like,
Yeah,
put it on the offender, on the person who did it. That's one, but then also there's so many other factors. So there's certain vulnerabilities that can make someone more a prime target, let's say, for like a predator to prey on.
yeah,
So, for example, like something like immigration status could impact you. You're right. So, if you are here in the United States and you're undocumented and your partner abuses you or sexually assaults you, you're probably less likely to go report that because then you risk being deported.
exactly.
Similarly to like sex work, sex workers are at increased risk of violence, not because sex work in itself is a dangerous job, but because it's criminalized. And so if a woman or just anybody who is a sex worker gets sexually assaulted on the job, they risk getting arrested when they go and report it. And like
Exactly.
we're talking about the most extreme things, but kind of we've all dealt with a society that tries to silence us and to
Exactly.
shame us.
Yes.
Um and so like I think there's been a bit of a cultural shift over the years. There's Me Too, but like now people are actually talking about it. But for a long time, like abusers would bank on the fact that this person doesn't want anybody to ever know what happened because they're gonna get shamed for it, even though they're the victim, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Crazy. Crazy. And part of your activism work, like what are your main, like basically exposing that, how that's why you have the podcast, but also there's conventions, or what other type of ways are there to expose these kind of things?
Yeah, so I'm part of the Global Reclaim Coalition to end image based sexual violence. And I represent both our law firm and myself as a survivor. And so we have like regular summits where we meet up with people all over the world who are fighting these same exact issues.
Yeah.
So that in itself is big because you get to kind of like exchange ideas. We get to talk about what's been working, what's not working in our own countries. So that in itself, like that only formed within the last year.
Hmm.
And so that's been a really great thing to be like sort of founding member of. But it's that, and it's like just using any platform we have. So, like, I have my podcast and I'm on Twitter. My boss, Carrie Goldberg, she started this law firm like 10 years ago. And at the time, nobody was talking about image based sexual abuse, which at the time we used to call revenge porn.
Hmm.
And we don't really use the word revenge porn anymore because one, it's not revenge because you didn't do anything to deserve it. And two, it's not porn because it's not consensual.
Hmm.
So anyway, with image based sexual abuse, Carrie was one of the only people talking about it, and she was writing blogs, she was on Twitter, like tweeting about this stuff, and that's actually kind of what got a lot of attention over to her law firm. She's kind
Yeah.
of built a presence through that. So like at our law firm, we talk about protests through litigation and like trying to change laws that way and trying to get like justice that way. But then we also just look at like what are all the different angles that we could attack this from.
That's crazy that they was only created like a year ago, when all this been happening for centuries. And what is your personal story regarding this issue? Like, why were you a victim and why you got involved into this world?
So back in 2014, I was 19 years old and I broke up with my ex-boyfriend of 2 years. Just wanting to be on my own, and he would not accept that. And so he started stalking me for started with lying about things that were happening in his life. So he told me he got jumped, and then he started telling me that all of like his family members were dying and things you never think that somebody would lie about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he started threatening suicide. And then when that didn't work, he started threatening me with my naked pictures. And so that was still like end of 2014, and I went to the police because actually at that time I was living in New Jersey, which is one of 3 states
You
that
were so young. You were so young.
yeah, I was so young. But New Jersey was one of the few states that actually had a law criminalizing like the dissemination of intimate images. But still, like long story short, there wasn't much that police told me that they could do. And then in February of 2015, he actually made a profile on Pornhub with my full name, my phone number, my address, and my pictures. And I found out because a stranger texted me thinking that I made this account. Um, and so that was I went straight to the police again, and was turned away and was told that I needed to find proof that it was him, even though he had been threatening me for months. And I was shamed at the precinct by our town judge, who told me that I basically asked for my pictures to be put on a billboard. So
Oh
it
my
was,
God.
yeah, it was a really horrible experience. And I left feeling so defeated. And I got the picture, like, my most immediate thing was get the pictures down because I didn't want it to spread. The longer it's up, the more it spreads. And I was also way more afraid that he was gonna go to, like, Twitter or
Yeah,
something, where people that I know would see it. At least
exactly.
on Pornhub, it was a bunch of random strangers, so
Mhm.
it was still violating, but, I was scared that it was gonna get worse, basically. So I got the Pornhub profile came down within 30 minutes of reporting it. It was really quick. And then I went to go party that weekend, and my mom was like, 'cause I went to Poconos in Pennsylvania, like, go-to party spot for for Jersey kids, but my mom was like, "No, you gotta stay home, we have to figure this out, I'm talking to a lawyer. I found this lawyer, she's really young, she's been through something similar, she seems really cool, I think you'll like her." And I was like, "What is some lawyer gonna do?" After I've been turned away from police, but I ended up meeting her. Her name's Carrie Goldberg, and so my lawyer is now my boss.
Incredible.
So long story short, she helped with first we went to police and we were turned away, even she was turned away. And then she ended up finding somebody like in my county, a prosecutor who would open an investigation. And so that's how they were able to like subpoena the websites involved and get the information and trace it back to my ex-boyfriend. And then she also helped me to get a restraining order in family court. So that helped like with my situation. And then it took about a year to actually like have his sentencing happen. And he pled guilty, got 5 years probation, and that was it. And then I just continued on with college, graduated, moved to Spain, teaching English, and kept in touch with Carrie Goldberg, over email. And then when a job opportunity came up, I was like, yes, I will fly home tomorrow because I really wanted to work at this firm.
And
And
then helping other people that go through the same problem. That's incredible. And how did you deal with this? Like you had to seek for like therapeutic help, or like did it affect you? This like it was a trauma for you after like when after growing up, or how did
yeah,
you deal with this?
well, like I'll say in terms of my upbringing and kind of like the attitudes around that, I grew up in a Cuban family, and there's definitely a certain way a woman's supposed to act, expectations, and also very Christian growing up. So sending naked pictures was not like
Yeah.
ever something I thought I would be talking to my parents about. Thankfully, they just cared about protecting me and trying to not let this stuff go viral. But Carrie was the first person to tell me that this wasn't my fault. So that I think kind of it made such a big shift in like the trajectory and like how I saw myself like using this experience.
Hmm.
So like while I was going through it and working with Carrie, she was being interviewed by a journalist for the New Yorker. And she asked me if I wanted to be a part of this article. And so I was like, sure. And so I had no idea. Like, I was like a 20-year-old at this point, like just speaking with this journalist and, gonna go to sentencing day and have this journalist with me. And then the article ended up actually coming out like over 6 months after sentencing. So it
Hmm.
was like all of these things were happening, and like I remember feeling like a little bit weird about sharing it because I was almost like, one, are people going to think that I'm like using this for attention or something? And then two, I I always felt like it could have been worse. Like, for so long, I thought that what happened to me, like, wasn't that bad, even though it really was, like,
Yeah. It's a little
um,
bit like repressing.
I was repressing it, definitely. So while I was going through it back then, I was just partying a lot. I mean, all I wanted to do for months after breaking up with him was just get away from him. I just wanted to be done. I wanted to be free. I want to forget about it. And so I definitely started numbing myself.
Yeah.
Like,
Like filling the void.
there you go. And through partying, which, like, look, I was young and, like, needed to have my partying, like, weekends, I don't regret any of it. But I definitely used that to not think about the hell that I was dealing with. I also, like, I'm already sort of a workaholic, and that's, like, my dad is the same way. And so it's natural for me to, like, pour everything into work.
Yes.
And so, like, in college, at one point, my last semester, I worked full time through college. I was working retail. And so I would, like, make my retail schedule around my classes. So I literally did not have a day off.
Anytime, any free time.
No, no. It was like last semester of college, I remember I was interning, I was working, and I was going to school, and, like, didn't have a day off for months. And I loved it. Like, I was like, "This is exactly what I need." And then I went to Spain, and that changed everything because the lifestyle there is totally different. Like, it's
Yeah.
much slower, and I started really having anxiety then, because suddenly, like, I couldn't just distract myself with even just the energy being here, like being in New York, the energy of other people. I love that, and, like, I didn't have it.
Yeah, and even when you are in this like escape mode, doing all these things to numb, which I've gone through similar things in my life, it gets to a point where like you can't take it anymore, and it starts coming out. It starts like, with anxiety or with different things. And how did you deal with that at that time?
I put off for a while, but then it wasn't until, like, I started my work here at the firm in 2018. So that's when I started to realize that, like, I wouldn't get anxious or anything at work, and I don't ever get triggered by meeting with victims ever. But I would come home and the anxiety would just, like, fill me up. So that's when I started looking into therapy. And at the time, I ended up doing, like, a 20-week program at the new school for psychology, because they have, like, graduate programs where
Yeah.
it was like $20 a session. And I always tell people about it because it's a really good start to
Mhm.
get your foot in the door of therapy if cost is an issue. So I started to do that. That started to unleash this, like, floodgate of, like, questions, and I'm just, like, unpacking everything and journaling. But then in 2019, and this is when my body was, like, really telling me, "You need to change something." I would have, like, 2 drinks and blackout. Like, completely blackout, and I've always been able to drink, so it was very, very weird. And it happened a few times, and it was scary because, like, I would come to, like, 2 to 3 hours later and
Yeah.
just forget the last 2 hours. And so I'd been talking to a friend at the time who was like, "Maybe you should go see a psychiatrist, see if something's going on." And so when I went, she was like, "Yeah, you have untreated PTSD. Your
It's
nervous system is so unbalanced, it can't handle alcohol."
exactly. You process all of those emotions that you had inside, basically.
Yeah, and I was like a wreck. Like, I remember the one, like, I was having a lot of social anxiety, which I never really experienced
Mhm.
before. I'm, like, a very social person, but suddenly it was like I wanted to be by myself. And I remember being at a barbecue, like, shortly before I ended up going to see a psychiatrist, and, like, turning to my friend and being and I hadn't wanted to go, and she was like, "Just come, just come." And I turned to her, I'm like, "Let's go to the bathroom." And she's like, "Hold on a minute." I'm like, "No, we need to go now." I just broke down crying. I was a mess. And I had like one white claw and it just made me cry. So that's when I started antidepressants, which I definitely needed to do. And now I'll say like after like 4 years, I've cut down my dosage of antidepressants because for me personally, I think I definitely needed it for the PTSD, right? But then I needed to get to a point where I was like, okay, now my body doesn't need
Exactly.
this
Or
kind
you
of.
handle it by yourself, with your body, with your mind. Yeah, of course. And have you ever, for example, in that moment of feeling the void, did you feel the void with sex, for example? Have you ever used sex as a coping mechanism instead of because of own pleasure, self pleasure? Have you ever used sex as an escape?
Maybe it's interesting though, because I think it's like, I think it's complex, right? I think you can use sex as an escape in a healthy way.
Yeah, I do that. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm like, honestly, because like for me, sex is like one of the only times where I feel like I can actually just let go of everything else.
it's the same for me. Yeah, it's like that moment where I go to another place. It's like
Yeah.
an escape, but in a healthy way, without
Totally.
using any substance or yeah,
Yeah. But there was definitely like a period where I was having a lot of unsatisfying sex. And
yeah,
so that's where I think it's like not good, right? So you can't always predict if the sex is going to be pleasurable, right? But it got to a point where I was like what, 22, 23, 24, and I was just like having so much like just like disappointing sex with guys, and I I realized I'm like, I need to change something. Like, it has to be more intentional. And I started doing more reading, more understanding about human sexuality, and like learning about non monogamy, and just like relearning everything I knew about dating and sex and relationships and all of that. And so that way I've been able to use it in a way that, yeah, I would say in some ways, sex is a coping mechanism. Partners that I trust and feel, or at least feel comfortable around, but even like by myself, like just to have an orgasm, like that's a huge stress relief. If I'm feeling anxious, honestly, like I'll grab a toy, and sometimes that's what I need
me
to
too.
get the release.
Yeah, me too. Even sometimes to go to sleep, it's like
Yeah.
oh, it just makes me go right away going to sleep.
It's
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
And how do you manage uh all these topics that we've talked about in your life right now, like with relationships, with going out, with work?
I definitely don't have like the best work life balance, I'll say. Like when I talk about using work as a coping mechanism, like that's one thing that I think probably will never change about me, although like I'm more aware of it. But like during COVID, for example, I didn't know what to do with myself other than like be in front of my laptop and work. But now, I think the podcast in itself like has been such a great creative outlet because this work is so big for me and it's so much of my life. But there's a lot that I can't talk about because of confidentiality,
Yeah,
and I don't always want to talk about my story. Like I do like in settings like this where we kind of delve deeper into like certain parts of it. That's
mhm,
love doing that. But I just felt like there was so much like I was learning and gaining from the conversations I was having, either with like survivors or other activists or like coworkers, or even just like people in the sex positive community in New York City that I was meeting, and like both professionally and personally, right?
yeah,
The podcast has been a great outlet to translate everything, like all of it into something, I don't know, like to turn it into something tangible.
yeah,
I I definitely could do better with the work-life balance and hanging out with friends and stuff. It's funny because back when I was like 19, 20, I would go out like 4 nights a week, every single weekend,
Yeah.
and now I just can't. I don't have that energy. But I did, like I said about the antidepressants, I started to notice that I wasn't getting excited even to see friends.
Yeah.
I wasn't super depressed, but then I also wasn't getting excited about anything. I didn't really feel that happy. I was just, it was very dull. And so ever since I cut down, and I did this, with advice from my doctors and stuff, and like I know it's not for everybody, but when it felt like, okay, I need to try cutting down on this, and then I did, like I just started to feel like the vibrancy of life again, like I'm going out again, I'm seeing friends, I'm doing all these things and dating too. And that, like, you asked about dating, like that's been fun. And it's interesting because I'm on like all the dating apps, and also I speak with victims who have suffered something so horrible from like somebody they met on a dating app, like
Yeah.
every single day, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do it, and I know for me, like, dating non-monogamously has been really healing in itself. I started, like, dating couples years ago.
You meet a lot of people that way too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what would you say, for example, to any woman that is suffering or is a victim of abuse right now? What's the first thing they have to do? And does what do women that don't have the resources to get a lawyer, for example, what can they do to be able to get help in this situation?
So, I would say first thing is to build your support system or to find who is your support system so that you're not alone. That is number 1. And then safety
Yeah.
is the biggest thing. So if you are in a physically dangerous situation, then you need a safety plan. Um, it kind of, I mean, it depends on like what you're going through, right? So
Yeah.
like whether you've been sexually assaulted or physically assaulted, or if you're dealing with, stalking sort of scenario or something along those lines, know that it's not your fault and that you're not alone and that there is help out there. And if you don't have like money to hire a lawyer, it depends on what you need, right? If you need, for example, an order of protection
Hmm.
or a restraining order, then there are so many nonprofits that will represent people for free. Like in New York, we have Sanctuary for Families, we have Her Justice. Every single state has really great like organizations like that that give free representation. Depending on what you're looking to do, like for example, if you want to see if you have any civil options, so to sue for money, right? You're not paying a lawyer generally to sue.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, like that's a contingency agreement. So in that kind of situation, like like what we do, if people come to us and they say, for example, in New York, we have the Adult Survivors Act, which extends the statute of limitations for sexual assault of adults in New York. So if you are a person who was sexually assaulted in New York as an adult
Hmm.
years ago and you ran out of time, the statute of limitations ran out. We have a 1-year window where all of those like expired statute of limitations go out the door. So you have the opportunity to pursue a case under the Adult Survivors Act. That ends November 23rd, 2023. So I don't know when this is coming out, but just so you know. Um,
Perfect.
but like with that kind of situation, we're trying to see, can we get a client money? And so the client is not paying us anything upfront. We take the risk and make the our attorneys will make the money demand, and then we take a percentage of whatever you get back. So you might not always need to pay a lawyer if you have like naked photos out there, on the internet. There's a lot of services that offer takedown work as well. There is something called Stop NCII, which a lot of like tech platforms have taken part of to cooperate in taking down images. Now you can fill out Google forms to clean up your search results. So there's a lot out there depending on what you need. And
There's
then also, like, if you don't have money, seek community, right? Because you never know who's going to pitch in a little bit here, what other friend has something to pitch in here. Like, people want to help you, right?
exactly. Community is so important. So important. And so, Norma, thank you for all this conversation. It was incredible and so helpful. And my last question to you is like, where do you see that all this is going with how the world is right now, with all that's happening technology wise? What's your vision going on with this? Is it going to get worse? Is it getting worse?
It's so hard. In some ways, it's like getting worse because we know that technology has evolved and continues to evolve and grow at like pieces we can't even understand. And like right now, so much of the media is like really interested in talking about like AI and
Uh,
deep fakes and stuff. And so we know there's more of that abuse coming, but there's also been a huge cultural shift. So, like, even thinking about when I was a victim of image based sexual abuse to now, like, it's different. Back then in 2015, New Jersey was one of 3 states with the law criminalizing it. Today, we have 48 states plus DC that have laws. So, it's like things are kind of getting worse, but then, like, there's also this cultural shift happening. And Um, for the first time, we're seeing like the White House and major media outlets talk about like big tech accountability and, you know, being able to sue tech companies, which we can't do. And that's like a whole other topic. But long story short, in the US, we have the ability as individuals to sue any company that has caused us big harm, right? Because of a defective product or something. The tech industry and the gun industry are the only ones where we
uh,
can't have our day in court. It's
in-
because this one law called Section 230. And so, like, it's something our firm has been dealing with for years, but now it's something that's finally people are talking about and kind of getting angry about and being like, wait, why do we let these tech companies have so much power and control? Because they really have the ability to impact like who becomes a victim,
yeah.
right? And how easily it is to abuse someone with tech.
Yeah, even relate to the war that's happening right now and like how it always comes to this idea. It always ends up in this idea that like few people have the power in the
Yeah.
world and it's basically just everything runs around these same things.
Even that, like, I don't know if you saw, there was a video that it was like an AI video of Bella Hadid, because she's Palestinian, and, like, they made a video of her saying she stands with Israel, and it's like,
Crazy.
that's so violating, you know, like, if
Yeah, avatars of people and like imitating persons. It's terrible.
yeah.
But yeah, thank you, Norma. Thank you so much for
Thank
this
you.
conversation. It was a pleasure spending time with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, this was great.